Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Bacon Bits and Bites podcast. And I'm super excited today. I have with me on the show Amira Polack. Amira is the founder and CEO at Struct Club, an app for fitness instructors who design motion to music and their fans, starting with spin, also known as indoor cycling, and treadmill running. Amira's career has centered around technology, startups, and social impact, and her opinion has been featured in Time, Forbes, and the World Economic Forum agenda. She earned her MBA at Harvard Business School and BA at Princeton, and you can find Struct Club on the App Store. Welcome to the show, Amira.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm so excited to chat with you today because just talking to a fellow fitness instructor, I thought like, oh, I totally have to have her on my show.
Definitely. Love teaching fitness, love doing fitness. Those of us who are fitness fanatics out there, there's definitely a common bond.
Awesome. So before we get started talking about fitness, I actually wanted to first dive into your entrepreneurial background because I was doing some research about you and I read that you launched your first venture, when most of us were just running around recess, doing whatever. You launched your first venture back in the third grade. So could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I will say I'll condition first off by saying, I wasn't striking a C corp or an LLC at that age, but those were, yeah, just some of my first business activities, and I kind of fell into it by accident. The story there is in third grade, my hands were really small. I struggled with those big, 90s JanSport backpacks. I don't know if you ever had a JanSport backpack, but just like carrying things around, and my backpack is a little too big for me, and I sort of struggled there. And so basically created a keychain. My mom and I went to Joann's or Michael's or one of those craft stores. We got a kit to make keychains. We did. They're these chunky pink starfish things that we would put onto a keychain, put it onto the zipper, and made it super easy to open my backpack. As soon as my friends and just classmates started seeing that, they started asking, "Can I have one?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, sure. So long as we can cover the cost of the keychain, and then be able to a little bit more to be able to reinvest in buy. I mean, what we would call now like reinvesting in inventory. You think about a margin. That's not really what I was thinking at all in the third grade, but it was just my mom and me making keychains. We got asked about it. There was demand, supply and demand. Ran the numbers, and that was, yeah, I guess we didn't have a name for a business or a brand or anything like that. We weren't marketing it or anything. I guess you would call that organic traction today, but that was my first venture.
Wow, that's really cool. And I know also researching a bit more about you that your mom, she is also entrepreneurial herself, like she made jewelry.
Yeah, my mom has made jewelry all my life. That's her talent. Semi-precious stones is her practice, and a lot of actually today it's been interesting as I've been learning about the trend around healing crystals. When you go and I don't know, say go on Amazon or something like that, and you do a quick search for healing crystals, it's actually a lot of the same material. Semi-precious stones, healing crystals, the amethyst, the quartz, the turquoise, whatever you might call it, healing crystals or semi-precious stones.
Hmm.
So we definitely had an entrepreneurial flair, product flair, growing up in my household.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I'm always like really curious about people who grow up in an entrepreneurial household because I'm just thinking like to myself, my parents, they were very non-entrepreneurial. They had the steady job of 25, 30 years, and I just thought it was interesting. Like I never guessed I would, consider like doing my own thing, starting my own thing. I honestly thought I'd be pursuing the same path as my parents, and I always thought like people who are entrepreneurs like yourself, you know, in order to be an entrepreneur, you had to be like a certain type of person. You had to, like have that background and have gone to business school. But it seems really interesting how people have stumbled upon entrepreneurship in many different ways. Like there is no one true path to entrepreneurship.
I would agree with you. I would say that people are, and we know this, people are creative. People like to create things. And for people to be able to access things that they want, maybe purchase things, you need resources in exchange, as we set up our economy today. And so, there are a lot of people, actually entrepreneurs that I've talked to that really more have fallen into entrepreneurship through solving a problem. So creativity, exchange, and problem solving. Those are a few prerequisites to an entrepreneurial path. Yeah, I don't think that for those who are like, oh, you have to be born with an entrepreneurial flair. I mean, there are definitely some personality traits that might predispose somebody to be interested in an entrepreneurial track as opposed to not. I think folks who, and there's like a blend of introverted versus extroverted folks, but I think for those who are extroverted who love interacting with people, it makes them a bit more predisposed to, say, a sales and or a marketing role in the entrepreneurial realm of things that you could do. And for those who might be more introverted, product management or product creation or engineering, those are, a lot of correlations that I see with personalities of folks and what the types of roles within any ecosystem of entrepreneurship requires. And so business entrepreneurship, it requires all of the dimensions of personality, diverse dimensions and varieties of personality that we have innately as people. And there are a lot of problems to be solved in the world, and there are a lot of things that people need. And more and more, we absolutely need entrepreneurs and anybody who is excited to solve problems, to be creative, and to interact and exchange with folks to jump into the space.
And so I find it really interesting that you mentioned, the different sides of entrepreneurship, like being introverted versus being extroverted. And I consider myself to be an introvert. And I thought it was really interesting that you mentioned product management and like product creation, because I had actually recently just completed a program regarding product management, and I found I really enjoyed the idea, like just going from that end to end, like ideation to product launch. And I was just like, oh, okay, well then I guess then it makes sense. Maybe I'm better suited for that particular area versus the sales, because I actually remember having jobs in retail and in sales and like I hated working at the cash and at the front. I always like wanted to be in the fitting room or in the back doing inventory.
I hear you. And, I mentioned one of the reasons I bring that up is because I'm an introvert as well, and I come from a family of introverts. A lot of us on the team at Struct Club are introverted as well. And so you really have to find, for those who are interested in entrepreneurship, really channeling rather aspects of your personality, channeling your strengths into the types of roles, types of activities that cater to your strengths, that enable you to really see out your full potential. And there's some actually fantastic salespeople as well. And I don't want to generalize, of course, but salespeople who actually are introverts, but they do very well one-on-one with people and in those one-on-one relationship contexts or one-on-one partnerships. We're humans are social beings. We love that interaction, but some folks are better in groups and some folks are better one-on-one. Lots of different preferences out there. So it brings me to one of my like top recommendations for entrepreneurs or people seeking to get into entrepreneurship in general, which is know thyself, know your strengths, know your weaknesses, and actually oftentimes those strengths, weaknesses are a double-edged sword. They come together.
Yeah.
And just paving your role, like paving your way in this life.
Yeah, I definitely prefer the one-to-one, which I think makes sense as to like why I like to do the podcast interviews. I'm curious to know, because I think a lot of people before they decide to pursue entrepreneurship, they think to themselves if they would need to like pursue an MBA versus starting their own company. Like, do you have any advice as to like trying to figure out how to decide whether or not you should go the MBA route?
I would say, I mean, different MBAs focus on different things. So depending on the program, I would, really say, in HBS's case, it is very much a leadership school. There are few programs out there, and you want to be like really selective about the type of program that focus specifically on the entrepreneurial element of business, entity setup, financing, all that's required from day one, ground zero, putting together a product, pricing, selling the product. In fact, a lot of that is not covered in core curriculum in just broad MBAs in general. And so I guess the second thing I would also consider for folks who are thinking about their MBA, thinking about going into entrepreneurship after, an MBA these days is really expensive. That may change in the future. Some programs are more affordable than others, but you really want to be sure that you have a solid reason for getting the MBA, and there are many, many reasons to get that MBA. But I would really consider that before jumping into entrepreneurship because yeah, those first maybe few months and maybe it's first initial couple of years, you're going to have to be really scrappy, and you may different depending on your business. There might be different financing pathways that may or may not enable you to have high payroll coming out of B school to be able to start paying back that debt. So lots of considerations there. I think usually when I chat with people, they're very individual, one-on-one personal considerations when it comes to their life, their career, their finances. But those are just like I guess, checklists of things that I would start to consider in that capacity.
Yeah, that's really great advice. So, yeah, I wanted to talk also what you got into while you're doing your MBA. You became a cycling instructor. So I'm curious to know how you got into that. Like, were you always into fitness as a kid?
Yeah, I think a lot of founders and entrepreneurs that I talk to and folks deep into their career, a lot of the interests that they have today stem in part from influences when they were a child or growing up. So for me, in my LA household, in my Filipino American household, music, dance were a big part of my life growing up, and outdoor sports and athletics. And so the way that those interests growing up manifested for me as an adult was a love for group fitness classes, particularly fitness classes that crafted the motion to music. And I became so excited and obsessed with these types of classes that I just took it up as a hobby while I was in B school. I had the time. I was on a career break. In fact, I was on winter break when I got my spin instructor certification, my first certification. And I just started teaching in the gym at school. Just started teaching classes in the basement studio at HBS.
Oh, that's awesome. And I just want to circle back to talking about being an introvert because I don't know, maybe if you experienced this before as well, but a lot of people come up to me after my class and they're very surprised when I tell them I'm an introvert. But I guess maybe some people don't realize that again with introverts, we're not very like social with groups and small talk, but I find when there's a purpose or if I know exactly what I have to say or if it's in somewhat of a leadership role, I find myself gravitating towards that. Or I find being a group fitness instructor, it's kind of like where I can be extroverted. It's like where this other personality of mine just like, shines. And then after the class, I just go back to being like, okay, I like, go back to my shell and being introverted. So do you feel the same way with regards to teaching group fitness classes?
I think this is a really interesting question because I don't believe that whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, that gives you any less care for helping people. It doesn't make you any less capable of teaching people. It doesn't make you any less capable of communicating with people. I think there are different ways that individuals channel those skills and those tendencies of extroversion and introversion in those relationships that give them unique advantages. So, say, for example, for us, those of us who are introverts, we're really good listeners and we're really able to be perceptive. And so, when you're looking at a class of, say, a live class, 30 people are in there, you're watching and you're catering the programming to them and you're helping them make corrections that help them get to their next level. So that's just one example of, yeah, I think for sort of the stereotypes around introversion, it might be surprising for some that there are so many of us that are fitness instructors. But I'll just say that, different personality traits lend themselves to unique strengths as well, especially if, for those who have a love of helping other people to be healthy, who have a love of teaching, who have a love of helping people be their best. There are many ways to do it.
Yeah, that's so true. So When you were obtaining your certification, what was the process like? Like, did you encounter any obstacles or did you just, breeze through it?
The first one was, where do I get a certification? What is a certification? And just what kinds are there, and where do I even start? I was lucky at the time that my baby sister, I have two little sisters, the youngest one, I had somebody to ask. And I asked her, how did you get your certification and how did you decide? And so she recommended that, why don't you talk to the Group X manager, Group Exercise manager, basically the instructor manager at the first place that you want to teach at, and ask them what certifications they accept. So that was a really smart recommendation because it just defines your parameters. There are so many now, especially not even thinking about back in I think 2016 when I started my first certification process. The number of certifications for instructors has even grown since then. So defining, and then actually, fun fact that a lot of us know as instructors, but maybe not all of your listeners would know, is that not all studios now require external certifications, and some of them have developed their own in-house certifications. So I think it's really smart if you're wondering, where do I get started? How do I get certified? What is the education that I need? What are the certifications that I need? To just ask the places that you think you might like to teach what it is that they require, and what it is that they accept.
That's so true. So I'd like to talk about your company, which makes sense considering that we were talking about group fitness instructing. So could you tell the audience how you got it started?
Definitely. And you described it so perfectly what it is that we do, which I appreciate. So Struct Club, community of fitness instructors. We provide and apply a platform for these instructors to design motion to music. And we've started with spin and we started with treadmill classes as well. We have a few HIIT classes and sculpt classes in there. And there are actually all types of instructors who, if you're the type of fitness instructor who likes to design class to music, we've seen all kinds of classes that have been designed in the Struct Club app, ranging from Zumba, cardio dance, bar, to aerial yoga. So
Oh,
very, very
wow.
interesting. And just getting started, to your question on getting started on the business, I actually started to find a problem right even during my certification process and after my certification process, where we were in class learning a lot about how to manage equipment and physiological elements to exercise and teaching tactics, but we weren't really getting prepared for that 45-minute class, 30-minute class, 60-minute class, the actual design of that experience, moment by moment. And in fact, there's a ton that goes into it. I found that my first couple of classes that I taught, I was spending like 10 hours preparing for class. Because it's kind of like, and people are shocked by that. Whoa, like how do you spend 10 hours preparing for a 30-minute to 45-minute presentation? You're preparing the workout, you're preparing the playlist, especially if it's a motion to music type of class. You're preparing all the things that you're going to say, and possibly all kinds of different operations that you need to execute all on your own when you're in class. There's a moment that you need to turn on the fan. There's a moment you need to turn up the fan. There's a moment that maybe you need to cue the lights and turn them from blue to green if your studio has light colors. There might be a moment where you need to lock the door because after the first 5 minutes of class. So there's like all these actual things that behind the scenes folks may not realize that singular instructor is generally coordinating all by themselves. And so I felt like I needed one place to listen through my playlist that I had picked one time, mark it up with key cues, and then have all of those cues play back to me in class of what to do, when that was happening, for how long, what was coming up next, to enable me to anticipate the next move. And so that's how Struct Club really got started. I got to a point where I could no longer really just simply afford with my time to spend 10 to 20 hours per week voluntarily preparing for every single class. And I had people who'd be coming back to these classes. I couldn't just use the same playlist. And with every new playlist, every new song comes different, kind of a different cues at different times, depending on what the music kind of commands and inspires. If you want to put together, kind of that well-crafted boutique style experience in a dance-like experience. So that's really the problem set that we started out with Struct Club.
Yeah, that's a really interesting problem to solve because, like, as you were explaining all the logistics and the planning for a group fitness class, I was like nodding my head, and I guess like with my particular classes, the Les Mills, there is like the choreography and playlist available, but however, I can definitely relate to like having to learn the moves and then like what cues to say and like at certain points too you need to also add in that motivation. And I remember from my training learning how to use like your different voices, right? So like when there's, say for example, during the warm up, you're not going to start yelling at them, but when it comes to a high intensity track, you want to pick up your voice. Or there's that build when you hear like the music starting to build and like people get ready, it's like, okay, like it's coming, and then boom, explosion. And yeah, I just find it I didn't realize, and it's one of those things too, I think when going into instructing, I didn't realize how much prep was involved. I thought like, okay, yeah, this is great, I'm really into fitness, I want to help motivate others. And yeah, speaking to my members after class, often they'd say, oh, you make it look so easy, and like, oh, you probably can like prepare in no time. Like, no, I actually spend a lot of time listening and yeah, like doing the moves, figuring out what I have to say. And then also when you mentioned switching up the playlist too, because I remember I have members who are diehard. They would come week after week after week. I'm like, oh shoot, I should like change this song and like mix it up. So yeah, it's definitely relatable, and I think it's awesome. And then just tying it back to the solving problems. A lot of the times, when people start companies or start those side projects and products, it's often a pain point they experience themselves personally. But it turns out that, a significant amount of other people definitely feel the same way. So yeah, I think what you're doing is really innovative and truly amazing. So another question of mine is, when you first started that company, if you don't mind sharing, what kind of obstacles did you run into?
What obstacles don't you run into as an entrepreneur? This is just name everything. Everything was a challenge. Just even some of the first setup questions were, and this is just going to sound so boring. Actually, like when I mentioned some of these things in press interviews, I find that they cut them out because people find them so boring. But you kind of need to know this as an entrepreneur. Like, what bank are you going to be banking with? What credit card are you going to be using? Like, how do you analyze, just like even analyzing the different benefits and costs there. What entity are you trying to set up based on the potential future transactions that you want to be able to be executing as a business? Who do you want to bring on? Like hiring and people management and leadership. These are the biggest challenges of entrepreneurship and running a company. How do I develop software? How do I design software? For me, I love the product stuff, and I love the problem solving conversations with customers, potential customers. I love learning about their lives. I love learning about their insights and their opinions. I think it's just learning about meeting people individually, even though I'm an introvert, but one-on-one, it's just one of the things that I'm most fascinated about in life, and connecting with folks and problem solving and working with them collaboratively. So those are some of the more fun, bright spots for me. I think for some entrepreneurs, they might consider that among the hardest things. Like, man, how do I develop an app? And luckily now there are all kinds of tools from, actually, first, before you design anything software-wise, for those interested in software, I would start with paper. You can always like erase a pencil mark, right? But it's a lot more costly when you have to encode something different about the UI. Every challenge under the sun, I would say, like money and money management is another thing as well. Surmounting funding and funding obstacles. So I don't know. Where do I begin with all of the entrepreneurial challenges? Those are things I'm sure that folks listening to this podcast are reading about every single day.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for sharing, and especially the nitty gritty and what things might people consider to be mundane. Definitely, like it makes sense. Like you need to know those things, like what type of credit card, like how you want to structure your business. And I think, yeah, sometimes people, they overlook those things. So thank you so much for sharing it. And I promise I won't cut that out.
No, it's just the sheer volume, and none of it's rocket science, right? One of the things I've talked about early entrepreneurs is that they're like, well, the beauty of the earliest stages, in some ways, for some of those activities, is that they're not rocket science. People have been there, done that before. There's somebody to ask if you know an entrepreneur or if you're able to connect with one, and oftentimes it merely takes reaching out, and they're down to chat with you. It's kind of amazing. It's an incredible community. They are more than happy to show you the path or connect you with somebody who is closer to what the new process may be. Say if they started something 20 years ago or 10 years ago, if the process has been updated, connect you to somebody who has a more updated perspective. But that's one problem, just the sheer volume of the things that you need to do with the 24 hours in the day that you have. So establishing focus and establishing priorities in the right order. If there is a quote right order being the next, big challenge, you're like, wow, how do I manage my time correctly? And how do you know when it's managed correctly and when those priorities are in the right order? And when you're doing something efficiently and effectively. And like the third, I think is really just a lot more, and maybe this is the biggest challenge, are the mental and the emotional challenges that come with being an entrepreneur. There's nobody there to really validate you or hold your hand or tell you you're doing a good job. There's nobody who's there to give you an A plus on your test, right? There aren't a lot of benchmarks where you can say, hey, like I totally did this new innovative thing right. And it's just the nature of the job. And so I think just doing what you can to prevent yourself from burning out or going overboard with the workload, the managing the inevitable self-doubt that might peek its head around the corner, imposter syndrome is a very common commonality amongst entrepreneurs, just managing those mental and emotional barriers as well.
Hmm. So with respect to trying to avoid burnout, I'm sure you do a lot of working out. So in addition to teaching spin classes, what other types of workouts do you enjoy?
Oh man, so many. Yeah, of course I love spinning. I love shadow boxing, fitness boxing. That's when you talk about different voices, that's more of like my aggressive fighter side. Spin is more of my inner dancer. And I love yoga. So there's a mindfulness component, of course, to a lot of formats of yoga. And by the way, it's just such a diverse modality. There's so many ways to do yoga, but also elements of mobility, flexibility, balance, and strength that you get from different practices in yoga that I absolutely love. Whenever I can I don't go to dance classes just by myself generally, but if I ever get to go with one of my sisters or something, or even my mom sometimes, I just really enjoy that. I love the group dynamic. So many fun formats. There's so many fun formats of fitness, but I would say those are my top ones.
Yeah, that's totally true. I'm not gonna lie, I'm not really much of a dancer. My mom, she's more of the dancer, like she loves Zumba, but I just think it's really interesting. Think of my own fitness journey. I actually started doing spin classes at the local YMCA, but I'm not a spin instructor. I teach more HIIT type classes and group weightlifting. However, though, because of the pandemic, I actually got into road cycling, and I've been doing it quite often, so much that like I'm going once a week or doing really long rides on the weekend, and now like tracking it in the Strava app. So now I'm beginning to wonder once in my area when gyms start to reopen and we start to teach again, like, should I consider getting my spin certification?
That's so interesting. And I think COVID too, that's a really good point, has changed or added a lot of new hobbies and behaviors to people's routines, just different dimensions of our routines as we've been forced to cope with quarantine for an extended period of time. And so I've known a lot of people who were not big, say, into running to pick up running just around their neighborhood, simply to get out of the house, simply to take a break and to get some sunshine. So, yeah, just like so many possibilities of ways to move your body and be active and find something that ideally you enjoy and that you look forward to doing, really.
Mm-hmm, for sure. And since the start of the pandemic, have you noticed like an increase in the usage of the Struck Club app?
Yeah, it's been interesting because we've seen just a consistent increase in usage pre-pandemic, during pandemic, and even now as things are starting to reopen. Yeah, and usage in different ways. So one of the things that we did during COVID was enable a portion of our app is called Explore. When you open and jump into the app, it says Explore on the top of the page, enables you to explore various instructors' workouts that they've published for anybody to be able to use at home. So that's actually a new addition to our product since COVID. And with that, it's not just increased usage in the platform, but it's new ways to interact with the
Mm.
platform and new types of engagement. And I think that's been just really interesting to observe folks' behaviors and think about how we can support them in, as you know, they've been adapting their lifestyles during this time. And it's interesting to think about as well what's going to happen next. I think, everybody who all of the listeners to the podcast are going to have their own thoughts about what it is that they might be doing next in their fitness now that things are starting to at least trend towards reopening.
Yeah, and actually, speaking of like the trends with things starting to reopen, I'm also curious to know like your thoughts about the increase in like online classes, and then people have realized like there's the convenience of working from home, and there's the convenience of like working out from home. So, do you think that'll still end up being popular?
Absolutely. I think that one of the things that we've seen during COVID, actually, I know one of the things we've seen during COVID because it's I mean, all we have to do is look at the numbers and look at the sales, is that folks have been invested in a lot of at home equipment, just all kinds of things they can use, stuff they can use to work out with at home, and a diversified set of activities that they're doing to stay active and creative ways to stay active as well. And so I think what that will do, this is just my thought going into moving forward as folks are getting vaccinated and studios are reopening, those gym classes and the gyms are reopening, is that, folks who want to be active are going to find ways to be active, to do just doing what they want, when they want it, the way they want it. And so sometimes it's going to be about convenience. Sometimes it's going to be about fun. Sometimes it's really going to be an outlet to be social. Sometimes it's going to be an outlet to blow off steam. So they're just going to be, because we've like diversified our activity sets and diversified the spaces that we can do fitness as a result of COVID. I think people are going to start to get more creative about all the various ways they could be active and fit that to their mood or how they're feeling that day or the time of day that's going to be appropriate for them to be active at that point. Somebody who might be a 5:30 p.m. spinner might be also a 9 a.m. yogi, right? So different times of day, right? But you might just be in a different mood for different activities at those different different times of day. You might be in the mood to do something at home. You might be in the mood to do something with friends, to do something outdoors, or to do something back in the gym.
Yeah, I used to be that person doing the workouts in the evening and the weekends. And yeah, since the pandemic, I've found I prefer doing my workouts in the morning. And then circling back to cycling, I am not a morning person, but I will sometimes set my alarm on the weekend for a 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. ride, which I don't think I would have ever done had not the pandemic started. And it's interesting when you were chatting about how people were investing in equipment for their home gym. And I remember the beginning of the pandemic. So I actually didn't have any gym equipment just because I always use the gym. Like it just seems so convenient to like I'll just go get out of the house, go to the gym. All the equipment's there. I don't need anything. So once the pandemic started and everything started shutting down, I was like, okay, I'm going to go online. But I think I went a little bit too late because everything was on back order for several weeks. And for me, just trying to get something as simple as resistance bands, it took like over a month to get it on Amazon. So yeah, just going back to having to be creative, and you may laugh because I was using things such as like big jugs of laundry detergent or like cast iron skillets, and they're pretty heavy. They have some weight, so like just walking around the house with lifting them. So yeah, you definitely find ways to be resourceful because it's not only just for your physical health but for your like mental and emotional well-being. But yeah, so I have a few sets of dumbbells now, so I don't have to worry about lifting so many everyday household objects.
Absolutely. And you know what? I'm actually not surprised. I have heard of so many things that people have been using to just lift through the pandemic: bricks, rice bags, jugs of water, like you said. I literally know somebody who bought a mold that looked like emulated a 25-pound weight, and they bought cement. They're like, look, cement is super cheap, and they made weights out of cement. So I've just
Oh
seen so
wow.
many things. Towels that people use just to create some kind of resistance between their arms. I mean, exactly like you said, many ways to be creative with your household items.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I wanted to circle back to Struct Club, and if you could talk about your experience being in one of the accelerators powered by Techstars, what was that like?
Wow, that was like Techstars and the Lift Labs Comcast NBC Universal program, which was powered by Techstars, was like a modern day MBA for startup tech entrepreneurs on steroids. It was an incredibly intensive 3-month program. It was really exciting. We got to meet with dozens and dozens of industry experts who just had so many different disciplines and backgrounds, ranging from software, data, big data, AI, to media experience, and just like deep into their careers as well. So we just had the privilege of being able to talk to so many people. And when you're a startup, it can just be really hard, no matter where you went to school, even, or how hard you've worked in the past, or how established you might be in your career. It can be really hard to gain that initial credibility because you're starting a new company. It's a new idea, it's a new product. You may or may not be monetizing yet. And just establishing some kind of credibility can be, one of those uphill battles for folks, potential clients, potential partners, to take you seriously. And so I noticed that the program with Comcast, NBC Universal, and Techstars was definitely helpful in that regard, to signal to people, oh, hey, there are these big companies, these big brands that are behind Struct Club. Maybe they're a little bit more legit than I might have thought. And I don't think it materially changed from, the day before the program to the first day of the program. Fundamentally, who we were or what it is that we were offering. We weren't launching like anything new the day before versus the day after.
Right.
But it definitely helped us to accelerate. They're called accelerators in that regard.
And then with respect to funding, what has that experience been like?
It's been really interesting. And I think there are different approaches that various entrepreneurs will want to have depending on their business, their industry, their product, how they want to grow, their monetization strategy that they should take around funding. It sounds like just such a simple term. It's like money, right? Like, but how do you how do you finance your business? There's equity funding. There are ways to fund through grants. So among our very first sources of funding were actually grants from school as I was getting started on product. And that's one reason that for anytime I speak to students in entrepreneurial programs or who are thinking about starting a company, I absolutely encourage them to leverage the resources that they have at their school and at their university. And even if you are no longer in school, a lot of schools will have alumni programs around entrepreneurship. Maybe they'll have pitch competitions where literally, if you're lucky to win and you really focus on it, you might be able to win free money. So that's kind of the rarest form of funding. Increasingly, there are sources of grant funding for women, for Black, Indigenous, Latinx, Asian, and all kinds of entrepreneurs from various organizations that focus on supporting historically underrepresented and underestimated entrepreneurs that have opened up. And then there's, literally you've got these stories of entrepreneurs that are super epic of, not everybody will go this path, but like maxing out their credit cards. They do debt funding or they take out a loan from a bank. And so that's another avenue. And then, of course, there's the avenue of bringing on investors. And there are many within that realm, many different types of investors where, you end up sharing ownership with these folks who are providing some of that initial financing or growth capital for your company. And so I think for me, one of my big takeaways has just been learning a lot more about this space. And there's been actually over the past few years, a ton of innovation around it. Crowd equity funding and crowdfunding is a relatively new realm. I do believe it's still very much early days compared to where it will be in the future. There are new regulations around crowdfunding and crowd raising as well. And now there are more special purpose vehicles for entrepreneurs as well to like bring in different types, just like diversifying who they can bring in into ownership in their company and make startups a more accessible asset class for people in general to invest in. So it's been pretty exclusive historically who it is that can invest in startups, but now that's been changing a lot within recent years. So I think it's an exciting space. I'm excited to continue to keep tabs on it. We've dabbled in a lot of different avenues of financing. There's like an extent, there's some extent to which I can discuss some of those things, and there's some that I can't. But always happy to chat with entrepreneurs individually about what it is that they may be considering for their own business based on their goals and where they want to grow. Their budget and the milestones that they're looking to get to.
Mm-hmm. And what advice would you have for, let's say, female entrepreneurs who are looking to start their own tech startups?
Yeah. So do you mean unique recommendations for, I'm assuming these are unique recommendations for women as opposed to general advice that I would give entrepreneurs because there are unique challenges that women face.
Yes, that's
with
correct.
different stakeholders given bias and given systemic bias. Gotcha. Makes total sense. I mean, the first thing I would just call out is that, and this is something that we all know, but I think it's something that we forget to acknowledge in an entrepreneur's own day-to-day self-talk, which is that, yes, there are a lot of systemic challenges. These are historical. There are things that you might take blame for yourself. It's not to say that you should, just kind of give in to a victim mentality where like, oh, I'm a victim of everything. Nothing is my fault. And like definitely take ownership for things, but you can't always blame yourself, which entrepreneurs can tend to do. They take like so much ownership and responsibility that anything negative that might happen, any no that they might get, that they might tend to blame on themselves. The reality is, and you might have seen this transcriptual study of pitch conversations with venture capitalists that at TechCrunch Disrupt. This is like one of the most famous studies of this, but they found, and this is of no surprise to many women, that women would get more risk-oriented, downside-oriented, preventative questions, as opposed to the guys who got more opportunity-oriented, more promotion questions. So it's just, there's this embedded bias in these interactions that you might have that just might be more negative. Working on building resilience and making sure that you are kind to yourself when the world is not is really important to, back to that topic we were discussing on avoiding burnout. And you need to preserve your confidence. You need to preserve, just the fact that you already know that you're the best expert in the world on this particular topic. You might need to prepare to do extra outreach. You might need to prepare to be more diligent around the conversations around business planning. But guess what? All of this results in, and these are other numbers on the upside, that women owned and run and led companies generate more revenue faster, more profit faster, have more exit value probabilistically. They just perform better. So I would just say the silver lining of all of these challenges that you're going to face, it's going to feel like it's going to suck. Take them with a grain of salt when you can. Be kind to yourself. Preserve your own self-care and well-being to the extent that you can. Get more sleep than your peers. It'll actually, I know this is like, whoa, totally different topic, but sleep fitness, this is another rapidly emerging space that's showing how do we perform better? How do we be superhuman? How do we live longer? How do we do more in less time? How do we do more faster and be more effective? Sleep is one of those fundamental levers, in addition to fitness, in addition to nutrition. Take care of yourself well. And you know what? On average, you're just going to perform better than the guys because of all of this resilience that you'll have to build, all of these additional skills that you'll have to build. To just be superhuman. So those are just some of the things that I would advise and say. Step into your power, be confident in yourself. You know your capabilities, you know what you know, and your knowledge more than anybody else in the world does. You have your lived experience, be confident in that. Nobody else has that. And channel those unique powers. Those are real and significant assets that the world needs and the entrepreneurial space and economy absolutely needs. So those are absolutely things to be confident in.
That's really awesome. Thank you so much for sharing, and thanks for the very important reminder how important sleep is. And my final question for you is, looking back on your entrepreneurial journey thus far, was there anything that surprised you in particular?
I'm learning things every day. I'd have to say there's so many surprises that have come up. I think for us in the group fitness realm, we just didn't know that COVID was happening. I would say that was like a giant surprise that in some ways at the beginning was very much a blessing in disguise. It's forced us to learn a lot, adapt a lot. And I would say, yep, just many entrepreneurs and business owners will share that surprise, and all of us at home too, be like, wow, our lives were dramatically changed in ways that we never ever could have anticipated with this pandemic. I think that as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, that has its own implications, challenges, and surprises in business. That's one piece of it. I would say that with the pandemic and with all of the things that have gone on in 2020 and extended into 2021, what a lot of us entrepreneurs and business leaders have been called upon to do as far as leaders, the expectations around what we stand for when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, Belonging is another topic that folks will often bring up in relation to all of these categories, and standing for a certain set of values and speaking to that. And even in some ways, people wanting to look to you for answers and in some kind of expectation that you have all the answers has been really surprising to me as I mean, there are aspects where it's like, oh yeah, you get it. Like these are people who are leading businesses. Like if they don't stand for something, like why are they leading people? But the extent to which those questions, the sheer volume of questions and events that I know that I've been asked to answer to, and gladly so. I love talking about and discussing these topics, and but it's come in like such a surprising volume over the past year in conjunction with the pandemic. So I think that's been interesting, and it's been fun. It's been fun having these conversations, and I'm hopeful of a future where now with this resurgence of awareness and energy around these topics, there's more that we can do quickly to rectify things that have remained systemic challenges for way, way, way too long. So I try to take as much as I can, an opportunistic and high energy approach to these topics because I think that's what it'll require for us to get these things done together.
For sure. Agree 100%. And before I forget, where can people find you online if they want to get in touch or if they want to follow Struct Club?
Yeah, absolutely. You can hit us directly on any of our social media channels at Struct Club. So, yeah, STRUCTCLUB. You can hit me directly on my Instagram. I'm at Amira Polack, AMIRA POLACK. I respond to DMs. I'm also on LinkedIn. Any of your social media channels, Twitter, Facebook, and what have you. You can email me directly as well at Amira, AMIRA, at Struct Club, STRUCTCLUB.com.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your story and your experience. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks everyone for tuning in and stay tuned for more episodes. Ciao for now.